Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTube. This is Rosh, and this is a video series I'm putting together called AxeFX 3 Basics. So a little about me. I'm an LA-based guitar player and guitar tech. Some of my clients include Melissa Etheridge, Perfect Circle, Steve Vai, Bush, Dweezil Zappa, and more. So I wanted to give back to the Fractal community and show some of my approaches on how to build presets and how to dial in sounds. So if you guys have any questions, by all means, feel free to leave a comment. I would be happy to cover any topics you would like. This is for all you people out there that just got an AxeFX 3 or some of you people who've had it for years. So this video is going to cover how to do gapless switching. So one of the main issues that a lot of people run into when they first buy an AxeFX is that they run into a noticeable audio gap when you're switching between scenes or presets when you're changing amp sounds. So for example, in this preset, I have in scene 1, Fender twin reverb, and in scene 2, I switch this amp to a Captain Hook, which is kind of like a Marshall amp. Not only that, but I'm also switching the cabinet when I switch between scene 1 and 2. So what happens is if you are playing and you switch scenes, there's a noticeable audio gap. So I'm going to strum the guitar once and leave the guitar ringing. So you can hear that there's an audio gap in between, and it's more noticeable, especially when the amp's dry. And in slot 37, I've also made a copy of this preset. And so when you're switching presets, you're also noticing an audio gap. So for some users, that's not really that big of a problem, but for others, they need a completely seamless, gapless switching between sounds. So I'm going to show one of the approaches on how to do that using scenes as well as multiple amp blocks. So again, in this preset, I have on channel B for both the cab and the amp block a Marshall-like tone, and then on channel A, both for the amp and cab block, I have like a Fender clean style tone. And you can do this between any amp channel or anything like that. If you're not familiar with what amp channels are or what scenes are, I would suggest watching my previous video, which I believe is episode number 22, and it's called Scenes and Channels. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually copy this block, and we're going to put it parallel below this, and then we're also going to copy the cab block, put it parallel below this. And what we want to do is we want to connect these shunts and then put them back on the main line. So now we have 2 amp blocks and 2 cab blocks running in parallel. And I'll go over the cab blocks in a second. Of some people feed 2 amps in the same cab block, but we'll talk about that in just one second. So the first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to want to make sure that when the amps are bypassed, for both amps, you want to make sure the bypass mode down here is set to mute, so that when the amp is bypassed, for example, I'm going to bypass both amps, now you're not going to get any signal. Okay? And if one amp is on, you're going to get signal from there. Okay? So that's going to be one thing that you're going to need to do. And then the second thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to have to assign different amps to be on in different scenes. So for example, in scene 1, I put amp channel A. So we're going to treat this amp right here, this amp block number 1, as our clean amp. And we're going to treat amp block number 2 as our dirty amp. So I have the Captain Hook dialed into channel B. Now, you can obviously, dial in, you can put channel A here as the second amp as well. So I'm just going to copy channel B to channel A, just so that you can see that even channel, it doesn't matter what channel you're using, the amp just has to be, it just has to be a second amp block. So I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to copy channel B to channel A. So now what's going to happen is that these amps, this amp and this cab block down here, are in channel A, both for the greenback cabinet as well as the Captain Hook is in channel A. And we're going to bypass both, we're going to bypass the amp in scene 1. So now when I play, this is going to be my clean sound. Okay. And because we put the bypass mode to mute, then it's going to mute the output from this. Because if you put the bypass to through, what's going to happen is it's going to send a DI signal into this. So you're going to hear a mix of clean and DI, and you're also going to get more level. So you definitely want to make sure that this is mute when it's bypassed. Okay, so in scene 1, we're saving that this is our clean amp. This is going to be on. You can kind of almost visualize having 2 separate amplifiers, and you're just switching using like an A-B switch, switching between this amp, which is, we'll call this amp channel A or amp 1. And then in scene 2, what we're going to do is we're going to bypass this amp, and then we're going to keep this amp on. And it doesn't matter what channel you're using. Just for now, I'm going to use channel A. And in this cab block, I'm also going to use channel A. And again, if you rewind just like about 30 seconds ago, I just copied the channels so that A and B for both the amp block and the cab block are identical. Doesn't matter what channel you want to use. It really doesn't matter. Just make sure that it's the actual sound that you want. And again, you want to make sure both amps are set to bypass, or I mean set to mute. So we're going to mute this amp, and you notice it's on channel A. This is our clean amp. And then this one's channel B, channel A, and it's our dirty amp. So, and they're both set to mute. So now in scene 2, we're going to have this amp on, that amp off. And this is kind of like a, you know, just like a rock rhythm tone. And then again, scene 1, we have our clean tone. So I'm going to save that preset. And then now what's going to happen is you're going to have gapless switching. So I'll let the chord ring. So you can hear there's no gap. Now, some approaches that I've seen is, for example, using the amp and then running, I'm just going to delete this block for right now, running 2 amps into 1 cab. Now, you can do that if you plan on using the same amp, or I'm sorry, the same cabinet for both amps. So right now, you see that this cabinet, no matter what scene we're on, let's just say we're going to use the same amp cabinet channel A, and we're going to use the Fender Twin into this cabinet. And when we switch to scene 2, we're going to use this amp into the same cabinet. Now, if you plan on using the same cabinet IR, then you don't need to have a second cabinet. That's totally fine. So for example, this is what it would sound like. Okay, so you notice that we're just switching these 2 amps. Now, there comes a problem though, because of course, let's just say that your clean sound, you want to use one type of IR. So in this case, we'll use the clean sound and we want it with a double verb IR. So the Fender Twin is matching with the Fender Twin IR. But if we want to use like a different IR, one of the things is that some people will go, oh, well, I'll just use channel B for this one. So you notice that this is the greenback cabinet and it corresponds to, oops, we'll go to channel scene 2 and we'll use the greenback cabinet. So it's channel B. So when I switch between scene 1 and 2, it's also switching the cabinet. So scene, channel A, as you can see, and then when I go to scene 2, it goes to channel B in the cabinet block. Now, what happens is, instead of gapless switching, since you're switching the IR, you actually hear a pop too. So this is definitely something I don't recommend doing if you are planning on using one cab block. So you might be able to hear this kind of, do you hear that little pop when I go back to the clean channel? So for example, there's like that kind of sound. Now at lower volumes, or if you're playing at home or whatever, that's not that big of a deal. But if you're playing larger size venues or playing a gig or playing at high volume, that little pop can be really, 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 really terrible. So for example, I'll play one more time. So there's an audible pop there. So I definitely don't recommend using one cab block if you are planning on switching the IR. You're better off using 2 cab blocks and then just basically switching your signal chain between, the clean side, let's say, for this top one, which would be your Fender Twin, and then this one, And then when I switch to scene 2, I'm going to turn this amp on, and I'm going to use this cabinet. So now it also makes your presets a little bit easier to dial in because you're just making this one signal chain. So if you were going to use like a Marshall style cabinet linked with a Marshall style amp, and then a Fender style cabinet linked with a Fender amp, and then you get the gapless switching without the pop. So that is definitely an approach that you can use for gapless switching. Now, keep in mind that whenever you switch between presets, not scenes, there's always going to be an audio gap, even if you're using the same amp block. So unfortunately, switching presets will always have this little tiny audio gap. Now, personally, I don't mind it. I've been using the Ultra. I've used Fractal products since the Ultra and the AxeFX 2 and all that, and it's never bothered me. I've never noticed it once on tours, on gigs, on stage, whatever. But for some users, if they want pure, seamless audio switching between like amp sounds, this is definitely the approach. Because unfortunately, if you do switch channels within an amp, so for example, if I just go from A to B, just like I did earlier in the video, you're going to always have an audio gap. So anyways, that'll cover it for this video. So that is one approach to do gapless switching. In the meantime, if you guys have any questions, by all means, I would be happy to film more videos to cover any topics you guys want. You guys are definitely asking for some really great topics, which are in the queue. So other than that, I hope you guys are doing well, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.